Hi. Hi, my name's Mark, and welcome to the For a Lifetime podcast. What it means to be a Christian can look very different from person to person. Here at the For a Lifetime podcast, we discuss what it means to live passionately with Jesus for a lifetime. Jesus calls us to lifelong discipleship, and life with Jesus is like no other. We are shaped by what we see and hear from others, and I hope the unique experiences and perspective that God has richly blessed me with will inspire and enrich your life as we strive together to passionately follow Jesus for a lifetime. Hudson Taylor is a hero of the faith who passionately followed Jesus for a lifetime. Today on the For a Lifetime podcast, we will reflect on Hudson Taylor's life, and it is my hope that we will be inspired and challenged so that we would live passionately following Jesus. For me personally, the thing that resonates with me the most about Hudson Taylor was his desire to take the gospel to places where there were no Christians. During his time, that was the inland of China. Foreigners were predominantly only located in the coastal cities of China, and it was dangerous in the interior. Hudson's courage to risk his own safety so that others would hear the good news of Christ was accompanied by his willingness to adapt. He adopted Chinese clothes and even cut his hair to match with locals. This won him acceptance and allowed the gospel to be proclaimed without the distraction and preoccupation of his foreign clothes to the Chinese. I too long to see Christ proclaimed in places where there are no Christians. Compared to Hudson Taylor, the country of Turkey has been my China. My heart still breaks for the hundreds of cities in Turkey where there is not a single Christian to testify of the good news of Jesus. I'm honored to have experienced the kind of cultural adaptation I imagine Taylor experienced as he adopted Chinese clothes, hairstyle, and language. The Turkish language is part of who I am. I dream in Turkish. I love to sing worship songs in Turkish, and there's a sweetness and clarity when I pray in Turkish. I can talk about Hudson Taylor with regard to missions for a long time, but that's not the purpose of this podcast. As we reflect on Hudson Taylor's life, I hope that we will be inspired by the way that Taylor lived by faith. I hope that we will be challenged by his love of others. And I hope that we will be inspired to seek satisfaction in Christ, even when we experience tremendous sufferings like he did. Hudson Taylor was born May 21st, 1832, in Barnsley, Yorkshire, in the United Kingdom. He came to faith at the age of 16. His conversion was the beginning of him seeing God work through prayer. Hudson came to faith on the same day that his mother prayed for his conversion for hours. She was visiting her sister and went into her room to pray for him until she had peace that he had come to faith. A few weeks later, she returned home. When Hudson went to tell her that he had become a Christian, she said, "I know, my boy. It was not from any human source that I learned this. I know when you were converted, and it was in answer to my prayers." Hudson's sister had been praying for him daily to become a Christian as well. Needless to say, Hudson Taylor believed in the power of prayer. He would need to rely on that power because of his deep conviction that his life was no longer his own. He was a servant of Christ. If Jesus gave his life for Hudson Taylor, then Hudson Taylor was going to live his life in service to his Lord. Before he went to China, there were many examples of this zeal to live surrendered to Christ. In preparation to go to China, Taylor began to train in medicine. He barely made enough money to live on, but he would still regularly go through his possessions and give away the things that he didn't need. There were people who were in greater need than him, and he didn't want to be found wanting when he gave an account on the day of judgment. A story that shows Taylor's zeal, service of others, and trusting in God is when an Irish family called on him for help when they were dying of starvation. The wife had given birth a few days before and was close to death. The newborn baby was struggling. Hudson Taylor attended to their medical needs, but what they really needed was food. However, Taylor only had enough money to pay for his own food the next evening. He didn't want to give away all of his money. But when he went to pray, he was convicted. How could he pray to a God to help this family when he didn't trust God to provide for him the next day? He gave the family all the money he had and prayed for them. He left not knowing how he would eat the following evening, but he had joy in his heart. The next morning, he received a letter in the mail. In the envelope was money. It was 4 times the amount that he had given to the family. God had provided for him. He had been faithful. During this time before Hudson left for China, he would test his faith. He would put himself in circumstances where if he was to eat or have the money to pay for his rent, God would have to provide. God did provide for him. I resonate with the kind of zeal and radicalism because I did similar things in my younger years. Now that I'm older, I question the wisdom of putting God to the test. I know that my security in Christ was paid for by Jesus on the cross. I wouldn't want to put pressure on anyone to have to do something or go without something to show their quality of their faith. I do hope that others and myself would daily truly live by faith in Christ. Living by faith doesn't always include risk, but in our society today, risk avoidance and personal comfort are high on the priority list. So I wonder if we miss out on richness in Christ because we don't take advantage of opportunities to live by faith. Once in China, Hudson Taylor's love for others was on full display. In 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23, the Apostle Paul writes, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I become a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law I become as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I become as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I become weak, that I might win the weak. I become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share with them in its blessings." Hudson Taylor had the same attitude as the Apostle Paul. Taylor would give up his British clothes and wear Chinese clothes for the sake of the gospel. Not wearing British clothes meant that he didn't get the respect and honor that foreigners would normally get from the Chinese people. Wearing Chinese clothes, shaving his head, having a ponytail like the Chinese, dyeing his red hair black, caused him to be ridiculed by other missionaries. At the same time, dressing like and looking like the Chinese allowed Hudson Taylor to travel inland with ease. He was invited into homes. Women and children weren't afraid of him, and he was able to show them the love of Christ. All of these things are great practices for missions, but they're also great principles to love those around us. Hudson Taylor gave up his rights in order to share the gospel. He traveled where it was dangerous. He was robbed and taken advantage of, yet he gave his life to bring the gospel to people who had never met a Christian. He gave to others because of what he had received from God. Does this challenge you? It challenges me. Hudson Taylor is a hero of the faith because his love for others, especially the Chinese. His life is extraordinary. The extraordinariness of his life is not because of him. It's because of God. Our God is extraordinary. I propose that our lives can be extraordinary if we truly live by faith in Christ. And at the heart of that is the way that we love and care for others. Hudson Taylor also experienced a lot of hardship in his life. And at the same time, he was satisfied in Christ. Interestingly, the two things that I'm going to talk about now, Hudson Taylor didn't write much about in his autobiography. The first is the struggles he experienced in forming and leading the China Inland Mission. In his autobiography, he only writes about the highlights and praises God for what has been done. After 6 years in China, Hudson Taylor and his family went back to England because of health problems. During his return to England, he was led to form the China Inland Mission. He struggled to believe that he had the wisdom and leadership abilities to lead the mission. He wrestled with God until he finally had peace that all the results, responsibility, and resources needed for the mission was on God to provide. Taylor lived this out practically as well. It was the policy of the China Inland Mission to not solicit for financial needs. They would only ask God to provide, and God did provide. God also provided fellow laborers for the work, but it wasn't without difficulties. Another policy of the mission was that missionaries would adopt Chinese dress. However, there were missionaries, after they arrived in China, would disagree with this policy and refuse to wear Chinese clothes. Dealing with people like this was very difficult for Hudson Taylor. In one case, Taylor was accused of being a tyrant and overbearing. Hudson was deeply saddened when he was forced to part ways with those missionaries. Leadership came at a personal cost to Hudson Taylor, but he was sustained by the deep satisfaction that he had in Christ. The second hardship that I want to mention about Hudson Taylor's life is about his children. Hudson had 8 children. 2 of the children died at birth, 2 died in childhood, and 4 would grow up to be missionaries themselves in China with Hudson Taylor. The 4 who survived to adulthood were sent back to England at the age of 6 to get an education. I know what it's like to raise 4 kids in a foreign land, but I don't know what it's like to send them away for education. My wife and I were planning to send 2 of our kids to Arizona for high school when we were still living in Turkey, but in the end, we all left Turkey so that we could be with our kids as they transitioned to adulthood. All I have to say is conjecture about this, because there aren't many details about Hudson Taylor's feelings about the time with his children. But when I reflect on it, the loss of 2 babies at birth, the loss of 2 children, and then putting 4 children separately on a ship to go to England must have been hard. I know that the infant mortality rate was much higher then than it is now, and that child death was much more likely than it is now. But what loss and grief. Toward the end of his life, when he had to take a more administrative role in the mission, he wrote this: "It's no small comfort for me to know that God has called me to my work, putting me where I am and as I am. I have not sought the position and I dare not leave it. He knows why he places me here, whether to do or learn or suffer." I'm challenged by Taylor's surrender to God's will for him. He really did trust God no matter what the circumstances, good or bad. If you would like to learn more about Hudson Taylor, I recommend you read his autobiography and read the book Hudson Taylor's Spiritual Secret. I've been inspired by Hudson's life at different points and in different ways over the 25 years I've been reading about him. Currently, I am encouraged by the way God equipped him for different tasks at different times of his life. The thing that was constant in Taylor's life was his ability to hear God's leading and his willingness to step out in faith. May you and I do the same too. This has been the For a Lifetime podcast.